The room didn't just go silent. The energy shifted the moment Jasmine Crockett said the one thing no one else was willing to say out loud. It wasn't planned, it wasn't scripted, and it definitely wasn't something anyone on the other side saw coming. Because in a single breath, she exposed a contradiction so massive, so uncomfortable, that even the loudest voices in the hearing couldn't find the words to interrupt her. And what she revealed next didn't just stun the room. It ripped apart one of the biggest political narratives of the year. People watching from home felt it instantly. Something wasn't adding up, and Crockett wasn't about to let anyone look away from the truth hiding in plain sight.
Thank you so much. I just love that we care so much more about dogs' lives than we do actual lives, but I'm going to continue on. I want to make sure that I enter this UC, which is one of the reasons that we are a bit skeptical of any immigration, quote unquote, enforcement laws that y'all are trying to pass. This UC is from The Guardian. It says, immigrants with no criminal record now largest group in ICE detention. You know, I listened to Mr. Van Drew.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. I listened to Mr. Van Drew, who I do respect, and he went on and on and on about how this is about the bad guys. And I will be honest with you and tell you that when it came down to the election, there were a lot of people who really believed that the Republicans and the president were all about getting the bad guys out. People truly believed your words, but your actions are not matching up, because I've got the receipts showing that they are not matching up. And so call us a little paranoid in believing that the hypocrisy may continue to come from across the aisle. Speaking of hypocrisy, I do want to point out, since we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, because we couldn't talk about Epstein before. If y'all recall, we were gone for about 2 months because we couldn't talk about Jeffrey Epstein. And now everybody wants to act as if they want to have like a real honest conversation about the victims and the survivors and everybody else. Where was this conversation a long time ago? And I know that y'all love to go back and say that Joe Biden didn't do it. You know, Joe Biden is blamed for everything. Joe Biden didn't do anything, and it was Joe Biden's fault, and why wasn't Joe Biden? Joe Biden didn't campaign on it. I just want to be clear. If y'all can run me the tape, then run me the tape. But you know, when you campaign and you go out and you make a promise, then we evaluate whether or not you actually meet your promises. So listen, this was rope that y'all decided to hang yourselves with because the president campaigned on the Epstein files while we were campaigning on things such as affordability. We were campaigning on the things that now people are complaining about, right? Because of the tariffs and the fact that you guys won't say anything and tell the president, hey, sir, tariffs are taxes. We as Republicans, we usually don't like taxes. And guess what? That's gonna make everything unaffordable. So now he's gonna be our big savior, and he is gonna reduce the price of foods because he is the guy that actually increased the price of foods. So listen, if you can have this honest conversation about Epstein now, let's just go ahead with this lame duck president and be honest about everything that the American people care about. They care about affordability. They care about the fact that literally people are starving in this country because we have 42 million people, and I don't remember any one of you during that almost 2-month break deciding to go on faux news or any other news outlet and say, you know what, it is wrong to have 42 million people that are relying on $6 a day to eat, and we have the money because somehow our president was able to find under the couch cushion, the one that JD wasn't sitting on, under the couch cushion, he was able to find 40, how much did he find to send to Argentina? 40, there we go, 40 billion to send to Argentina. But those emergency funds, he couldn't find them emergency funds so that Americans could eat. So listen, if y'all are gonna be honest and talk about Epstein right now, let's be honest about everything that is causing y'all to lose real bad. Did y'all see the election results on November 4th? It didn't go very well. So let's just start having honest conversations so that hopefully some of y'all in some of these tight seats, maybe y'all can get reelected.
She began by challenging the one storyline her opponents repeat every chance they get, that everything they're pushing on immigration is about catching the worst of the worst. For years, that phrase has been repeated like a slogan, a tool, a justification. But Crockett came in with numbers, with receipts, with a reality that wasn't built on fear or talking points. She entered a report showing immigrants with no criminal record are now the largest group in ICE detention. For anyone listening closely, The narrative didn't just crack, it crumbled. Because you can't claim the system is targeting dangerous individuals when your own data shows the exact opposite. Crockett understood that exposing this gap wasn't just about numbers. It was about trust. It was about whether lawmakers were being honest with the country or just hoping no one would check the fine print. And once she opened that door, there was no going back. The tension in the room thickened. The expressions stiffened. You could practically see people calculating how to respond. But she wasn't done. Not even close. And what she said next hit even harder. She pivoted to something that had been hanging over the chamber for months, something everyone remembered but few wanted to revisit. For nearly 2 months, Congress was at a standstill because certain members refused to allow any mention of the Epstein case. No hearings, no debate, no discussion about survivors, just silence. Crockett didn't let them forget that. She asked the question many Americans had been asking. If helping survivors was such a priority, where was all this passion before? Where were the speeches then? Where was the outrage? Because it certainly wasn't in those 2 months when the topic was blocked from even being spoken out loud. She pushed further. She pointed out how quickly some try to blame every unsolved issue on whoever sits in the Oval Office, even things they themselves once promised to fix. She reminded them that no one was forced to campaign on the Epstein files. Those were promises made willingly, and promises made should be promises kept. The air in the room grew heavier, and even though no one said anything back, their faces did. But Crockett was only warming up. She shifted the conversation to something that affects millions more Americans than Washington ever seems to acknowledge. She talked about affordability, not as a political buzzword, not as an economic theory, but as a real crisis unfolding in real homes. She spoke about 42 million Americans relying on food assistance, surviving on just $6 a day. That number isn't abstract. It's dinner for families, lunch for children, groceries for seniors. It's life stripped down to its most fragile form. And she wasn't shy about pointing out that during the long congressional break, not one lawmaker from the other side spent their television appearances talking about these families. Not one speech, not one press hit, not one passionate monologue defending hungry Americans. The silence wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. And Crockett made sure everyone in that room knew it. But the moment that froze the entire chamber, the moment that rippled across social media within seconds, came right after, because she revealed that while emergency funds for feeding Americans were nowhere to be found, someone somehow managed to dig up $40 billion under what she jokingly called the couch cushion. Not $40 million, $40 billion. And who received it? Not struggling families, not food programs, not communities dealing with rising costs. No, it was sent to Argentina. Billions materialized overnight for a foreign deal, yet the same leaders insisted there wasn't money to support their own citizens. It wasn't just a contradiction. It was a moment of truth, a moment that made the entire argument collapse under its own weight. Because you can't claim to prioritize your country when you consistently neglect the people living in it. You can't campaign on putting your own citizens first while telling hungry families there's nothing left in the budget, right before wiring billions overseas. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than any slogan ever could. What made the exchange even more powerful was the way she tied all of it into the everyday struggle Americans face at the grocery store. She pointed out how tariffs, those policies often framed as victories, are actually taxes. Taxes that drive up prices. Taxes that make essentials more expensive. Taxes that hit working families the hardest. She wasn't making predictions. She was describing the world people are living in right now. Higher bills, smaller grocery bags, stretched budgets, and a government arguing about issues that have nothing to do with the pain people feel day to day. She made it clear, you can't claim to be fighting inflation while defending the very decisions that helped create it. That kind of contradiction doesn't just confuse voters. It insults them. And the more she talked, the more undeniable the truth became. Then came the part that really unsettled her opponents. She pointed to election results, recent ones, and she didn't sugarcoat it. She said her colleagues across the aisle weren't just losing, they were losing real bad. Not because of elaborate conspiracies, not because of media bias, but because voters are paying attention. People are watching what leaders do, not what they say. They're noticing who fights for them and who disappears when things get tough. And Crockett wasn't warning them out of spite. She was stating a reality. If they didn't shift course, if they didn't start prioritizing the issues people actually care about, some of them may not be coming back after the next election. It was the type of truth few politicians ever say out loud, especially not in front of cameras. But that's exactly what made the moment so raw and so impactful. She reminded them that the job isn't about scoring points on cable news or pushing performative outrage. It's about representing people who are struggling, people who can't afford rising prices, people who work 2 or 3 jobs and still worry about feeding their kids. People who need actual solutions, not dramatic speeches. And then she connected every piece of the puzzle together. Immigration misinformation, selective outrage over the Epstein issue, economic denial, foreign spending while Americans go hungry. It all formed a pattern of priorities that didn't match the concerns of regular citizens, a pattern that exposed why so many people feel ignored. And once that pattern was laid out in full, there was no way to pretend it wasn't real, that Crockett's message wasn't about left or right. It wasn't a partisan attack. It was a question, one that echoed through the room long after she finished speaking. Who are you fighting for? Because if leaders can locate $40 billion in days, they can locate enough funding to help Americans who can't afford groceries. If they can campaign on transparency and justice, they can also stand with survivors every time, not only when it's convenient. If they claim to defend the economy, they should acknowledge when their own policies make life harder. The real issue Crockett exposed wasn't financial. It wasn't procedural. It was moral. It was about what matters more, political theater or the people living paycheck to paycheck. Her voice didn't shake. Her tone didn't crack. She delivered it all with a mix of clarity, frustration, and sharp precision. But underneath it all, there was something else, something more powerful. It was empathy. She spoke like someone who understands what it means to wake up and wonder how far a budget can stretch. She spoke like someone who has seen firsthand what happens when the system fails regular people. She spoke not for the wealthy or well-connected, but for those who rarely have someone speaking for them at all. And in a room filled with carefully crafted talking points, that authenticity hit harder than any prepared statement. The most striking thing about the moment wasn't just what Crockett said. It was how obvious it became that others in the room had no answers, no counterarguments, no explanations that made sense. They sat in silence because there was no way to spin what she exposed. You can't defend why immigrants with clean records are being detained at higher rates while claiming the system only targets criminals. You can't defend blocking discussions about one of the most notorious cases of exploitation and then suddenly acting like you've always cared about the survivors. You can't defend rising grocery prices while endorsing policies known to raise them. And you certainly can't defend ignoring hungry Americans while billions are funneled abroad with lightning speed. It wasn't one issue she dismantled. It was the entire structure holding those narratives together. By the time she finished, the hearing felt different. The political noise was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. People watching knew it. Commentators recognized it. Even some of her colleagues couldn't hide it. Crockett didn't just speak. She forced a reckoning. She made clear that accountability doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. And that's why her words spread so quickly outside the room. They resonated not because they were fiery, but because they were honest. Brutally, unapologetically honest. If anything became clear in that moment, it's that Americans aren't asking for miracles. They're asking for leaders who put them first. Leaders who acknowledge problems instead of blaming others. Leaders who fight for families trying to survive on $6 a day, not billion-dollar deals half a world away. Leaders who stand with survivors when no one is looking. Leaders who don't hide behind narratives, but confront reality head-on. And that's the difference Crockett highlighted. One that voters are starting to notice more than ever. So if you're tired of political theater, if you want the truth without filters or excuses, if you want leaders who fight for actual people instead of headlines, make sure you stay plugged in. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community that cuts through the noise. Because moments like this matter. Voices like hers matter. And the more people who hear them, the closer we get to the transparency and accountability this country deserves. Stay informed, stay aware, and stay tuned, because the next hearing might just reveal even more than this one.